When we talk about family dramas, many films tend to exaggerate conflict or push characters toward intense behaviors just to create tension. But the story we're looking at today takes a completely different direction: gentle, thoughtful, and deeply human. It revolves around something that many people experience in real life but rarely talk about openly: the quiet insecurity that grows over time, the feeling of not being good enough, and how small misunderstandings can slowly shape the way we see ourselves and the people around us. This film invites us to step into that emotional territory through the eyes of Han, a character whose internal struggles become the foundation of the entire narrative. The opening of the film introduces Han not as a dramatic or loud personality, but as someone who often moves quietly in the background of his own life. He is the kind of character who tries to contribute silently, who wants to feel confident, yet constantly compares himself to others, especially to his younger brother, Louis. For years, Han has felt as though he exists in the shadows, overshadowed by a sibling who seems to shine without trying. Louis is cheerful, diligent, and naturally optimistic, the sort of person who brings light into a room simply by walking in. To the rest of the family, Louis' energy is refreshing. But to Han, it becomes a mirror reflecting everything he thinks he lacks. The film does not portray Han as someone resentful or mean-spirited. Instead, it carefully illustrates how prolonged insecurity can distort a person's perception. Louis' light-hearted jokes, things he says in affection, things he believes will motivate Han land differently for someone who is already carrying the weight of inadequacy. We notice this through subtle visual cues: the way Han's expression tenses momentarily after Louis laughs, the way he looks away as if trying to hide something he doesn't fully understand. It is these small emotional touches that make the film successful, reminding us how easily misunderstandings can arise, even when no one intends to harm anyone. But the emotional core of this story does not emerge from conflict alone. It comes from the presence of Ashina, Louis' wife, who quietly observes what neither brother fully sees. Ashina is written as a bridge calm, perceptive, and compassionate. She notices the unspoken tension, not because she is searching for flaws, but because she pays attention to details that others overlook. The pauses in Han's voice, the way Louis talks proudly about his brother without realizing how differently Han interprets those conversations. Ashina becomes the viewer's point of clarity, someone who understands that both brothers care about each other deeply, but lack the words to express it. From the moment Han arrives for a family visit, the film gently sets up the emotional turning point. Nothing explosive happens. No arguments break out. Instead, we witness an ordinary day filled with ordinary conversations. Yet beneath that simplicity lies years of unaddressed emotion. The filmmakers deliberately choose a soft tone here, showing that healing often begins not with dramatic revelations, but with small acts of honesty and presence. When Ashina approaches Han for a quiet conversation, she does so respectfully, choosing words that affirm rather than confront. She shares perspectives about Louis that Han has never heard: how he admires his older brother, how his teasing was never meant to hurt, how he wishes Han could see the strengths that everyone else sees. This conversation becomes the emotional anchor. The script gives Ashina a warmth that feels grounded rather than idealized. She doesn't lecture Han or tell him how he should feel. Instead, she acknowledges his emotions and gently expands his understanding. For the first time, the audience sees Han pause not in discomfort, but in reflection, as if something inside him finally begins to shift. The scene is crafted to show that empathy, when expressed with sincerity, can become a powerful catalyst for change. The film has established its central theme: the quiet but transformative power of understanding. It invites viewers to recognize how easily people misinterpret each other, especially within families, where love and expectation are so closely intertwined. Yet it also offers hope. Without forcing anything dramatic, the story suggests that clarity is possible, reconciliation is possible, and emotional healing often begins with one honest conversation. As the story moves into its next phase, the tone shifts gently toward deeper emotional territory. What began as a quiet exploration of Han's insecurities now becomes a moment of confrontation, not confrontation in the dramatic or aggressive sense, but in the personal and internal sense. The film invites us into Han's inner world, where the weight of years gradually becomes too heavy to dismiss. This section marks the emotional climax, not because of external conflict, but because Han finally finds himself standing at the threshold of self-awareness, something far more impactful than any argument could have been. After Ashina's conversation, Han sits alone for a moment, absorbing everything she shared. The filmmakers construct this scene with remarkable restraint. Soft lighting, ambient sounds of the family in the distance, and a slow close-up on Han's thoughtful expression. It is a visual metaphor for what he is processing, the realization that the story he has been telling himself may not be entirely accurate. This is where the film shines. Instead of portraying insecurity as weakness, it frames Han's struggles as something human, relatable, and transformative when faced with compassion. Louis back into the foreground, completely unaware of the journey Han is undergoing. Louis enters the room as cheerfully as ever, speaking with his natural enthusiasm. To the audience, this contrast between Han's introspective calm and Louis' lighthearted nature reveals how two people can experience the same environment through entirely different emotional lenses. It becomes clear that he is starting to understand the truth Ashina mentioned. Louis' encouragement, even when disguised as playful teasing, has always come from a place of genuine admiration. The audience witnesses Han's internal barriers slowly dissolving. Instead of feeling pushed aside, he begins to see his brother's light as something that was always meant to guide him, not overshadow him. Ashina remained in the background, observing without interfering, simply witnessing the beginning of the reconciliation process. Her presence highlighted the film's message. Sometimes, change happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, when empathy meets openness. The director uses this moment to emphasize the importance of emotional listening. The emotional intensity of this section reaches its peak when Louis, still unaware of the underlying tension, makes a lighthearted joke about how he always believed Han could achieve anything he set his mind to. The film avoids any sudden declarations or dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, it allows the climax to unfold in layers, showing that emotional shifts are often delicate. The audience senses the shift, not through words, but through the gentler tone in Han's voice and the relaxed posture that replaces the tension he carried earlier. What the film is trying to say, that some of the most meaningful breakthroughs in life come not from dramatic revelations, but from understanding, patience, and the willingness to see one another with clearer eyes. Unlike traditional drama that relies on visible conflict or external obstacles, the drama here is entirely internal. It is carried not by raised voices or tense confrontations, but by quiet realizations, subtle shifts in behavior, and the emotional courage required to change long-standing patterns. This is where the story truly deepens, revealing how personal growth often requires more bravery than any outward struggle. In the days following the pivotal conversation, Han begins to see the world and himself through a perspective he is rarely allowed. The film does an impressive job illustrating this transformation with understated visual storytelling. Instead of presenting dramatic declarations, the camera focuses on simple daily interactions. Han offering a hand with chores he would normally avoid, participating in light conversation with a sincerity that feels new, and even smiling at comments that once triggered defensiveness. These details create a compelling portrayal of someone choosing growth over pride. Han's change is not sudden or perfect. There are moments where old patterns nearly resurface, hesitations, cautious glances, brief flickers of self-doubt. Yet what stands out is Han's renewed willingness to reframe his thoughts. Every time he feels the pull of comparison, he pauses, remembers Ashina's words, and considers the possibility that his previous narrative might not have reflected reality. This is where the film's drama becomes genuinely meaningful, not in intensity, but in authenticity. Louis, still oblivious to the depth of Han's internal struggle, continues being his natural self, upbeat, caring, and occasionally teasing in that familiar brotherly way. The difference now lies in how Han interprets these moments. A soft chuckle replaces the tension in his shoulders. An appreciative nod replaces the forced half-smile. The film uses these gestures to symbolize Han's progress toward emotional resilience. And in doing so, it reinforces an important message. Sometimes the most profound changes are the ones that quietly shift from within. Ashina remains the silent anchor in this transformation. She does not intervene, does not guide unnecessarily, and does not draw attention to her earlier role. Instead, she observes with a warm, knowing presence, recognizing that healing must come from Han's own willingness to embrace a new perspective. The film portrays her with admirable subtlety. She is not the hero of the story, but rather the steady influence that allows healing to unfold naturally. Her respect for everyone's emotional space elevates the narrative, giving it a sense of maturity rarely seen in portrayals of family conflict. The drama culminates in a gentle yet profound scene one evening when Han and Louis are having dinner and chatting with their family. The moment is simple, unremarkable, but hidden within this ordinary activity is an emotional echo from their past. Louis casually mentions his admiration for Han's repair skills, saying he learned many of them simply by observing his brother. Han pauses, almost startled by the sincerity in Louis' voice. It's a revelation he never expected. This moment becomes one of the emotional centerpieces of the film. The audience sees Han's internal walls shift again, as he realizes that admiration was always present. He just could not recognize it through the lens of insecurity. The scene is powerful precisely because of its simplicity. No dramatic music, no intense close-ups. Just two brothers in the quiet of a shared task, bridging a distance that was built on misunderstanding rather than reality. The film consistently maintains its emotional authenticity. The film is careful not to paint Han's journey as a simple transformation. Growth is shown as continuous, requiring effort, reflection, and humility. Han's newfound openness gradually influences the overall family atmosphere. Conversations become smoother, shared moments feel lighter, and the subtle tension that once lingered begins to dissolve. Even though Louis and others may not notice it immediately, the audience can clearly see how the emotional climate shifts because of Han's internal work. When Han stepped outside for quiet reflection, he took a deep breath and felt a sense of calm after all these years. This serenity marked a crucial turning point, not an end, but stability. It was the moment Han began to understand not only Louis, but also himself. What makes the film particularly moving is how it shifts from individual growth to collective harmony. It moves attention to the deeper meaning behind these developments, how empathy, when practiced sincerely, becomes a shared emotional language, strengthening the family from within. And that is where the film's educational message becomes clearest. But it is conveyed through gentle storytelling rather than direct moralistic pronouncements. Han begins showing appreciation in ways he never allowed himself to before. Han moving from a defensive mindset to one of openness and engagement. The film uses these small scenes to highlight a profound psychological truth. Healing begins the moment we choose to see ourselves and others with compassion instead of fear. What makes this transformation even more meaningful is that no one pressures Han to be different. The change comes from his own desire to understand rather than assume. This is where Ashina's earlier influence becomes so significant. Her gentle encouragement did not force Han into guilt or shame. Instead, it helped him realize that perspective can be expanded without invalidating feelings. Her approach embodies one of the film's strongest messages. Empathy is not about solving someone's struggles, but offering a space where they feel safe enough to explore them. Louis never intended to belittle Han. His teasing came from familiarity and admiration. But intentions are not always visible, especially when one is viewing relationships through the lens of self-doubt. The film demonstrates that understanding intention requires listening, patience, and sometimes the guidance of someone like Ashina, who can gently illuminate what has been overlooked. The more Han learns to examine his emotions, the more he discovers how many of his assumptions about Louis were shaped by fear rather than fact. The story highlights that emotional growth, even when subtle, is contagious. When one person begins to approach relationships with kindness and clarity, others often follow. And now, instead of feeling excluded or overshadowed, Han feels a sense of ease. Instead of interpreting their closeness as a reminder of what he lacks, he sees it as something beautiful, an expression of the love and support that surrounds him. In the end, the film has delivered its core emotional message. Understanding is one of the most powerful forms of connection. Through gentle storytelling, thoughtful dialogue, and nuanced emotional development, the narrative shows that healing does not require grand gestures. Sometimes, all it takes is listening, a willingness to see beyond assumptions, and the courage to believe that relationships can grow stronger with clarity and care. Han understood that jealousy had blinded him from seeing Louis's true intentions. Ashina's calm wisdom reminded him that trust is stronger than fear, and love grows when we choose understanding over suspicion. Their family bond became deeper, proving that clarity can change everything. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen when we dare to look within ourselves. If this message inspired you or made you think differently, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Together, we can spread more understanding and positivity. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue building a community that values learning and growth.